Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me again today. Today we are looking at something of a cult classic, and that is the Olympus Stylus Epic, otherwise known as the mju-II. Now this is a pretty popular camera. Some people might use the word overhyped, but I'm really not interested in that aspect of it. I just want to talk about what this camera is and what this isn't and how I feel about it. Now this particular one is the limited edition, and there's a few versions of the stylus. There's an older version that is the stylus, otherwise known as the mju, or the mju-I as people might call it. That is essentially also an automatic camera. It's a little larger than this. It has a 35mm lens, but it's got a slower f3.5 aperture. Now the Stylus Epic, or the mju-II, has a 35mm lens with a larger f2.8 aperture, so it's got a little bit of a faster lens. And then you also have your zoom models. Now this is a Stylus Epic, but it's a zoom 80. And these are capable cameras, but with zoom lenses you tend to have a bit of a compromise in the optics. So these have slower lenses, in other words smaller apertures, and the pictures just tend to be not as sharp, even though they're plenty sharp. And like I said, these are capable cameras, but we'll save this for another day. Now back to the mju-II. Like I said, this is the limited edition, and as I understand it, this was produced in limited quantities. The only real differences being some gold finish on, like for example, the Olympus logo. The shutter button is gold. All the painted type on the back is gold, and it's got the panorama, which the non-limited edition also has, but it's what I call a fake panorama. It just masks off the top and bottom of the frame. It doesn't actually shoot a wider negative. It just actually cuts off the top and bottom to make it look like a panorama. So I tend to not use that. In fact, I don't think I've ever used it, so the feature is there. Now in this video, this camera might be showing up as black, and the other versions of this camera, the non-limited edition versions of this camera, are available in, I believe, silver and black. Now this one is not black. The limited edition is what I would characterize as a dark brown with a hint of purple. It's actually a pretty strange color when you see it in person. I would liken it to something like the color of prune juice. So if you've ever seen prune juice, it's super dark brownish with a hint of kind of purple, and that's where that color leans. So it's a kind of a strange color, not an ugly color, but it is strange. And like I said, it might show up as black in this video, but it's not black. This really is a small camera. It's 5.5 ounces or 156 grams. And just to compare a similar camera, or not a similar camera, but a camera with a comparable focal length and an aperture. This is a Canon SureShot, otherwise known as a Canon Ef 35M. So you can see that it's quite a bit bigger, and it's not the most fair comparison. I'll admit that, because this is an older generation camera, and there were between this camera and this camera there were a lot of electronic advancements. But I just wanted to show you a point and shoot with a similar, not exact, focal length. This is a 38mm focal length. This is a 35mm focal length. But I just wanted to show you the comparison in size of this thing. This thing really is a tiny camera, and it's small and it's light. Another thing that always comes up is that the autofocus always nails it. I can't remember what it's called. It's like active autofocus or active beam autofocus. I can't pretend to know what that means exactly, but the autofocus, it does always nail it, even in really dark situations. The autofocus on this thing always nails it. I don't think I have missed an autofocus shot with this camera. Also, one of the real special things about this camera is that it has a spot meter. It's not super easy to activate. There are two buttons in the back here. There's the flash mode button, and there's the self timer button, and you have to push those with your nails because they're small and very narrow. So they make it so that you can't accidentally press them with your finger. So you have to press them with your nails, and it's not super easy to do that. I have kind of fatter fingers, so to activate the spot meter, you've got to push those at the same time. And you know it works because there's a little spot meter symbol that shows up in the LCD screen on the back. So it's got a spot meter. That's a super handy feature. Also, it's got a sharp lens. People people talk about its lens all the time, and I will agree that it's a sharp lens, but so are the lenses of a lot of fixed focal length prime lens point and shoots. So, you know, there is that. I won't argue this lens is sharp, but there's lots of cameras with sharp lenses. Also, this operates really quickly. The flash starts charging the moment you open up the sliding cover. I also really like this sliding cover. It's kind of, you know, your built-in lens cap, if you will. You can put it in your pocket without the exposed lens, and just to turn it on and start shooting, you just slide that door. So that's one thing I've really loved about these Olympus cameras. Also, you know, on this zoom model, you just slide that open and that turns it on, and the flash charges the moment that you turn it on. And I really like that feature. The camera is also weatherproof, so that doesn't mean that you can go swimming with this camera or that you can dunk it underwater. It does mean that if you're out in the rain, it will remain functioning. I have not tested that function. I tend to, you know, kind of cover it up or whatever, but if you get a few drops on this camera, I wouldn't worry about it because it is weatherproof. Going back to its operation speed, from when you press the shutter button, it takes the picture pretty quickly. So a half press on the shutter, like with most point and shoots, a half press will lock your focus point and your meter, and then a full press will actually take the picture. So you got your half press and then your full press. So I would characterize this as a pretty snappy little camera. It's really enjoyable to use. A couple of cons about this camera is that when you turn it off and turn it back on, the flash mode always defaults to being auto. So if you like to shoot with your flash off, you've got to remember to turn the flash off. And you do that with this flash mode button on the back. So you open it up and you hit that twice and your flash is off. Otherwise, if you turn it off and you turn it back on again by sliding that cover open, the flash is on in auto mode. The camera is plastic. It's not a metal camera. I can't speak to how sturdy this thing is because I've never dropped this camera. But even though it is plastic, it feels solid. If you give it a squeeze, it doesn't feel like it's buckling under, you know, under the weight of your grip. It feels like a fairly thick, strong plastic, but it is plastic, so I wouldn't recommend dropping it. One thing to point out that might seem a little obvious is that this is a fully automatic camera. It does not have any manual overrides. It does not have exposure compensation. Having said that, I feel that the meter in this thing is really, really accurate. I've taken a lot of pictures with this thing that I feel would have fooled a lot of other point and shoots. Scenes that are difficult, scenes that are backlit, where the subject might be underexposed. This meter nails it. You know, you do have the flash, so that helps with some fill flash if you need that. But even without it, I feel that I'm really confident with the meter in this thing and that it's really accurate, even with scenes that are pretty difficult for a lot of other point and shoots of this era. Okay, so we're going to take a walk around this very beautiful building. Up until the 60s, this building and this neighborhood actually was the United States Army's arsenal, and this particular building were the administrative offices. Now it's a bunch of offices, business offices, art galleries, and of course, it's where my office is. So let's take a walk through the halls and around outside, and I'll show you guys around a little bit, and we'll fire off a few frames with this thing. Now, like I mentioned earlier, by default, when you turn this thing on, the flash is in auto mode. So I'm going to turn the flash off. I'm going to hit that flash mode button twice, and that will turn the flash off so that it never fires. We don't need it right now. It's daytime, and we're going to have plenty of light outside. Now, one of the things that I really appreciate about this camera is the 35mm focal length. It is by far my most favorite focal length. I feel like 50mm is a little too tight for me, a little too long, so I like it a little wider. I feel like 35 is perfect. I like 28. Anything wider than 28 for normal walk around everyday use, I feel is a little too wide, so 35 is right in that window that I like to shoot at. So one handy trick that I've learned with this camera is that the lens focuses down to 14 inches. So you'll notice that this strap is about 14 inches long. So if you've kept the strap on your Olympus camera, it's roughly 14 inches long. That can be used as a guide for close focusing. Now the viewfinder in this thing is really bright. It's a little bit on the tiny side, but it's not prohibitively tiny. The Leica Mini Lux, which I reviewed in another video, has just a strangely tiny viewfinder, which I did not like about that thing. That was my #1 gripe about an otherwise great camera, was a tiny viewfinder. While this viewfinder is by no means large, it's not strangely small either, this being such a compact camera.